Hi everyone. I hope you guys can still hear my voice clearly and my screen is still visible, right? Yep. Thank you. Yes. So we'll just get started. So the next session that we'll be discussing is connecting third-party data sources, but using a different concept, right? So here in this screenshot, so it is ideally a screenshot of Google Flights where you can enter your from and to destinations, and then you can give your dates, and when you hit the search button, you will get the responses based on your criteria, right? So this is something that we're doing directly on some website. But what happens at the backend? How is this? How is just based on the criteria, how are we getting all of these responses? What is happening at the back end, right? So here in the response, you have a list of flights based on the criteria that you've given, right? So how is all this getting generated? That's something that we'll be discussing here. So how is this done, right? So here, before that, here the user has entered something. Yeah, user has entered something, and there is an aggregator which is working at the back end, right? So that aggregator brings in different options for you, be it flight 1, 2, 3, or 4. It brings in the different options for you to choose from, right? And how is this possible? So that we are doing based on APIs. Okay, and APIs are called Application Programming Interface. Yep. And here, not just that, you can also go ahead and do some custom integrations via your APIs. Okay. So here there are a list of components that you need to understand with regards to API. So authentication, limits, methods, and responses. So these are some terminologies or even the components that we need to be aware of before getting our hands on APIs. Okay. So with respect to authentication here, so it's like this. Okay, so when you try to access a any resource, let's say any resource from another client, we have to like specify the authentication to make sure that we are getting through, right? To make sure that we are getting through or getting the response that we want, right? So that's what happens with authentication. And with limits, with respect to that, when multiple users are accessing the API, we have to specify the limit. There should be some limits, right? So we should be able to manage that as well. And with the methods, here again we have to define what we're trying to do with the API. For example, are we trying to get some information or push some information or update some information, etc. And with responses, it's just the direct API response. So, for example, when we are trying to make an HTTP request to an API, what kind of response do we want to see? Is it a JSON or XML, like that? Yeah. So here, this is the basic of an authentication, right? We have client and a server, and the first step is to request for a resource. So the client is requesting for a resource, and the server is asking for the login credentials, the username and password. So with that, once that is entered, the server will verify it. And once with the entered details, if the verification is successful, it means the user is authorized, and then the requested resource will be sent to the client, right? This is the basic authentication that we have, right? And this can also be done via authentication keys, right? So next, with respect to limits, like how many times per day that you can do this, or how often, all of this information also you need to be aware of, and that for that it is based on your account subscription, and this is something that you can get clarified with your account management team. Okay. And the next important type is the method type. So here we have different type of method, which is get, post, put, and delete. Okay, so we have a collection, and so in terms of get is used in terms of a record or a table. We use get to retrieve a single item, and post is to post a single item or create new items in table. And with put, we replace a single item or replace all items in terms of table, and delete all items or single item using delete, right? So here, one other thing is, it is always important to ensure that we have appropriate method types. We've used appropriate method types. We have different method types, right? Get, post, delete. So, it is important that we use the appropriate method type in order to achieve the output that we are looking for, right? So here the data again is stored in different formats. As for example, when the data is stored in different formats, here in this screenshot, you see phone number and birthday. So these are some numeric data which has some formats to it, right? So here it is in this format. And if I move on to the next screenshot, the phone number is slightly different. It's in a different format, right? So here it is divided by two hyphens and three-digit hyphen, three-digit hyphen, and a four-digit, right? However, here in the phone number, first three digits are inside a bracket. So these are some different formats, right? So it is also important to have your data aligned in a structural form. Same goes with the birthday also. Here it's in some other format, and in the screenshot it has the date, time, and all of that. So align the data. So it is important to have your data aligned in some structured way. Okay, and the responses, the type of responses is either it can be JSON or XML, right? And there are three components of this API request that we can make. One is using the resource URL, and we can do using the page parameters. Just to reiterate, we've been using this page parameter in the dynamic pages yesterday, right? In yesterday's session. So we can use something like that. Also, we can do it with API keys. And important deluge concepts, how to use APIs, how to make use of APIs using the important deluge concepts. Yep. So those are like lists in Creator, right? So a list is a type of a variable that can be used to store multiple pieces of information just at once. As the name suggests, it stores the list, right? And it can also be defined as a variable containing multiple other variables. So these are some important deluge concepts that you can be aware of before getting your hands on APIs. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. And the next one is map. This is again another important deluge concept where we will be defining the pair of elements, which is keys and values. So that also is another important concept to be aware of. And here comes the invoke URL function. So this is important because invoke URL is something we will use to make an API call or an HTTP request. And this is a syntax for invoke URL where you can give the URL, the type, headers. The type is nothing but the method, and the headers, parameters, and some details and connections, etc. Right. So this is the entire syntax, and here the syntax will be terminated by just one semicolon at the end, not for each of the lines. Right. And these are the invoke URL type value. It is ideally the method type, right? The get, post, put, patch, delete, etc. Right? And this is a syntax of each of these methods. Get method has this kind of syntax where the type should be defined as get. And this is a syntax, and this is the same syntax with some data. So here we've given the URL, and then we put the type as well, which is a get type. Okay, and this is for post. Here again we've changed the type to post. That's why it's important to always make sure to use the appropriate method type, right? And here again we'll be parsing some data functions in order to get some information from the data that we fetched using API. So we can use these kind of functions like get JSON to JSON list, execute path to execute to XML list, etc. Each of this has its own actions to be executed. For example, get JSON, it's going to be same as get function for a map, for complex JSON variable as well. For example, if you take the to XML list, it's going to convert, it converts a string into a sequential and repeating XML elements as a list. So just need to be aware of all of this before we can write a piece of code with respect to APIs, right? So let's just directly jump into the demo and see how all of this is possible. So I want to show you before showing the demos, I want to show you a couple of APIs. So here for the APIs, I'm using this Postman API. So Postman API is something is like a client who helps us to make any kind of HTTP request. Okay, here it has the COVID-19. It is the COVID-19 API resource center. Okay. So here we have some list of APIs. So let's say this featured API collection. So let me just go through this. And here we have some list of APIs in each of the title. So let's say I'll just pick any one of this from here. Let's say I'm picking the COVID tracking project. And this is nothing but a tracking project for all the COVID cases, right? Um, back last year or back in 2019 or something like that. So it has some data about COVID-19. So I'll just click on data API, and here again I have more APIs. So I have some historic data like historic US values, etc. Right. So let's just choose any one from here. Let's say I'm using a current US values. Okay, so this is the API link that I'm going to be using. I'm going to use the JSON format, right? So now that I have the link, so how do I put it to use inside Creator, right? I'll go back to Creator. This is the application that we've been using. And I'll start off with creating a function. So I'll go to the workflows and I'll create a new function. I'll call the function as get COVID cases. Yep. The language to be deluge, and I'll just leave the namespace to be default, and yep, return type to be void, and I'll create this function. So whenever we create a function, these it gives me the syntax. It gets auto generated, right? So here I am with the syntax. So now what I'll do is here is where I'll bring in this. Here is where I'm trying to here's where I'm trying to make an API call, right? So this is when I will be using this invoke URL function, right? So I'll choose the invoke URL function from this left side. Yep, from this left side, I'll just drag and drop it. And it instantly asks me to set the values for each of this, right? So in the store response, I'll say, I'll give a name, let's say response. And here I have a space to enter my URL string. And this is where I'll be using this URL, right? I'll copy the link and I'll go ahead and put it in a string, right? And I'll specify my request type. Here, I just want to fetch or just to see some information. I just want to get the information using this API. So I'll just use the get method here. These are some optional parameters if you'd like to specify any. So I've just given all of that and I'll go ahead and insert it. So once I've done that, this is what I get. Okay, so this is exactly what I get. So I'll also go ahead and just give me a minute. So I'll also go ahead and info this in order to, I'll also info this response. And we'll copy and paste that response and see what data we've fetched using this API. So I'll save here. In the meantime, I want to open a JSON beautifier so that we can paste the response there. Just allow me while it's getting saved. Just allow me one more minute. Okay, let me try refreshing. I have lost. Yeah, so I'll just do it again, no problem. So invoke URL, and I'll just give this as response, and I'll type the get, and I'll insert, terminate it with a semicolon, and I'll save. Yep, I got it. So if I execute it, okay, I should info it as well, right? So I'll go ahead and info this response. And I'll save. Okay, what did I miss? Okay. Okay, let me just do that. So I'll go ahead and info the response. Yep. So once I've executed, so I have this, I have some data from the API, right? So I'll just copy that and let's just go ahead and put it in the beautifier. So I'll beautify, and here's what I get, right? So this is just one JSON and it has some data about the COVID cases, like for example, the date, the states, positive, negative cases, pending, etc. Right? So these are some values. So now we know how to fetch this data using this API. I also want to go ahead and parse in some values to this code. So how do I do that, right? So I'll go ahead and info more data. Like let's say, for example, I'll do dates or positive or something like that. Let's take date and positive. Okay, so I'll say info date colon, and here I'm going to append it and say response dot get JSON of date. So this is again a key name, and I'm going to take it exactly as it is from my data. Right? I'll do that, and I'll info the positive cases as well. Positive cases. Append it and do response dot get JSON, and again I'll take this key name from positive. Yep, I'll do that. And now let me try to save and execute. Okay, I think I should comment this out. I'll just comment this out and we'll get only this, right? So I'll execute, and yeah. So now I've just fetched this specific information from my API response, right? So this way you can go ahead and fetch any other information from here as well. Right. So now the next thing is, like, we in this API we only had one JSON, right? So let's say, what if we have, so it was just easy for us to go ahead and execute, right? So what if we have a list of JSON records? Then we might have to first convert it into a JSON list and then pass the details on it, right? So let me choose another API from here. Let's say, hopefully this one has, yeah, it says value for all states, right? So hopefully this should have more JSONs. So let's just go ahead and do it. So I'll come back here to this one. I'll just remove all of this. I'll remove this commenting out as well. And I'll just update it with this URL. And I'll say save and execute. Now I have a large response. So yeah, I hope this, I believe this has a lot of JSONs, right? So I'll just take this and I'll copy this, and let's go back here and put it here as well. Right, I put it here. However, I want this to be a list of JSONs. Yes, there is a huge data. So, but before beautifying this, I want to convert it into an array of JSONs for me. So for that, I'm going to be using the square bracket at the beginning and the end of this JSON, so that it will give me like an array. So I'll just do that and I'll beautify this. So yes, here, absolutely, we have some lists, right? So this is what I was trying to do when I put the brackets, square brackets here. So I have this list, and from this list, now I want to, iterate and get parse in some information. So how do I do that? Right, so let's say, let's just try to get some information. I think we have, so let's go ahead and fetch informations like state and probably the positive cases against each of the states. So let's go back and write that piece of code. Yep. So now what I'll do is, so now I'll declare a variable here because we have a list, right? So I'll declare a variable and I'll start off with all states is equal to response dot, I'll use this function called toJSON list of Yep, I've just declared that. And then I'm going to be iterating through each of these records. So I'll bring in the for each state in all states. Right, in all states. I'll info the state dot. I'll use this function called getJSON. And here I want the state first. So in the output, this is what I'm trying to achieve. I want the state and the positive cases against each of the state, right? So I'll take the key name from the state here. And I'll put it inside the double quotations, right? And I'm going to append it. Let's say I want to have, okay, let's leave a space, or probably let's leave a hyphen between each of this. So, and then I'll append it with the state dot get JSON of the positive cases, right? So I'll take the key name from here again, positive, and I'll terminate it with a semicolon. Right, so I've just closed all of this, and let me go ahead and save it. I'll save and I'll execute. So here, okay, just want to show you more precisely. I'll just comment this out so we'll see only what we want to see. Yeah, so by writing that piece of code, I've just parsed these information, and I've just got only the state names and the positive cases against each of these states, and I've just separated them with a hyphen, right? So this is something that you can do also, with when you have a list, you can perform these many actions using different type of functions also, right? So now just one more thing that I wanted to cover. So let's say I want to push this data to a form. We have this data, right? But we want to put it to some use. So let's say I want to push this to some form. So let me just go and create a form, right? So I'll go ahead and create a form from scratch, a quick form. I'll call this as COVID track, right? So I'll create this form. And I'll just quickly bring in some information like single line. And I'll say this as state, sorry. And I'll bring in some number fields for, okay, let's say we'll take this positive cases and negative cases, right? So I'll just bring in one more number field for positive and negative. I'll rename this as positive cases. And I'll rename this to be and this one should be negative cases. Excuse me for my bad throat. So I'll just be done with this form. Let's access this from live. This is a form which we just created, right? So I am here trying to push this data, the data when we executed, I'm just trying to push this data to this particular form. I can add, I can, go ahead and retrieve more data also. So let's just say, so now let's just say, so here, this form will obviously have a report also, right? So here, so I want that data to be shown here. That's what I'm trying to achieve. So for that, I'm going to be parsing in the information. So here, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and use one more, function which is called add record. Right. So I'll drag and drop the add records here, and I will go ahead and pass the information. So I'll say COVID, insert it into which form? The form that I just created, which is the COVID tracker form. And let me just, I have 3 fields, right? So let me just, and here I will specify the field for state. What do I want it to be picked up, right? So I'll say right? And the next field should be positive. So I'll want the positive as well. So we've already have the values defined for positive. So I'll just use the same. And for the negative case, go ahead and write it. State dot get JSON. I'll bring in the negative key name. So let's say it's negative. Just bring that in. And that's it. I'll be done with this, right? Just copy just to be on a safer side. So I've just passed it, right? So I've just used this add records function, and I've just told, I've just literally told Deluge that this should be the case, right? So for this form, I want all of this data to be picked up from this particular API. So I'll save it. Okay, just bear with me. Sorry about that. Just give me a minute. Just, yeah, got it copied. Yep. So I'll just refresh this. Okay, thankfully it's still there. So now I'll go ahead and save it. Yeah, and yeah, it will still be the same. But what we were trying to achieve is it should ideally come up here. Right. So it should ideally all of that information should ideally pop in here, right? It should bring all of the records here in this particular report. So this way you can go ahead and push your data from from the API to your forms, right? So this is pretty much what I wanted to cover with the integration. Sorry, with the APIs, how you can make use of some important deluge concepts to cover all of this, and this brings us to the end of this session here. So if you have any questions, please keep posting them in the questions tab and we will get them answered for you. Okay. So after this, I'll just leave the session open for 2 minutes for questions now. I'll be on mute until then. Thank you.